Hello again, I'm Stephen Chia, and welcome back to another episode of Heart of the Matter. Now, terrorism is a word that is no longer foreign to us, but when I heard it associated with someone who is just 15 years old, now that made my hair stand. In recent months, 2 self-radicalised Singapore youth were issued an order of detention and restriction order under the Internal Security Act, or ISA. They were only 15 and 16 years old. Since 2015, Singapore's Ministry of Home Affairs have dealt with 9 radicalised youth, and for most of us, that is 9 too many. So why are children as young as 14 becoming interested in extremist religious content? How are they getting exposed to it? And how much is due to the gaming environments they are in? Does rehab work? How can we help them? Joining me for today's discussion are Dr. Mohamed Ali, Vice Chairman and Counsellor with the Religious Rehabilitation Group.
Hi everyone.
Dr. Omer Ali Saifudeen, Head Military Studies Minor at the Singapore University of Social Sciences.
Hi everyone.
Mr. Nicholas Khoo, Co-founder and former Chairman of Singapore's Cybersports and Online Gaming Association.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here.
All right guys, thanks for coming on. Dr. Omer, let me start with you. I want to ask you, because you've done research on this, help us unpack and understand this phenomenon where someone is radicalized.
Okay, let's take a look at the word radical and let's steer clear of all the academic jargon behind it. When we talk about someone who is a radical in common literature and how it's been used over the decades, it comes from the Latin root word radix. The radix basically is the root of certain issues. So for example, if you're a radical, you're basically straying away from the mainstream. You're straying away from the center of things. So that's what it basically means. But then again, look, you have radical musicians, you have radical poets, and so on and so forth. The term by itself is not problematic. What we are talking about is radicalization into violent extremism. Now, that's where everything changes here. We're talking about radicalization as a process that moves you towards accepting ideologies that promote violent extremism. So what is the key feature of these political ideologies? Number one, you got to have an enemy. You got to have someone that you demonize and vilify as a source of all societal problems, your problems, everything. That's the central feature here. You got to vilify someone. Secondly, they advocate violence as a solution. And that's where the line is drawn.
Okay, so those 2 key aspects really make a difference to it. Dr. Ali, there are a lot of common myths that we have about radicalization. Share with us some of those.
People usually think that only the young people can be radicalized. Actually, those who have been involved in acts of terrorism, if you look at the profile, for example, in Singapore, the profile of the JI detainees, right to those self-radicalized online until today, those influenced by ISIS narrative, we find that there is no single profile of radicalization. Anybody can be radicalized, regardless of their age, gender, political aspiration, in terms of their work background.
Right.
Most importantly, I think, is people from any religious background and tradition can be radicalized.
It's interesting you mentioned that because very often we link it to Muslims. But I recall we've also seen a 16-year-old Christian boy who was detained back in 2021. He wanted to attack some mosque, right? It really has no boundaries in terms of who and where and what their background is, right?
Exactly. That's a clear evidence that anybody can be radicalized. This process of someone being introduced into this ideological or political message. And religion is just a tool being used by all these individuals.
Now, one of the things we often hear about those arrested, we know who they are, but we often don't get news of things like their family background, the schools that they went to. I mean, I can see why it's not necessary for the general public to know, but in your work with these young people, how significant is the role of family or the larger environment they are in?
Family plays a very important role in deterring online radicalization because families, they are the first line of defense against radicalization. For example, if radicalization is suspected, the parents and even other family members like siblings, they must realize that they have to intervene because that is actually helping their child. If they are not able to advise and give guidance, they must have the guts to kind of report the case to the authorities. The family institution is key. It has always been ignored by the entire ecosystem in fighting online radicalization. You look at the 3 cases that we have this year, that none of their family members were actually aware about their children's online activities. And we cannot leave this monitoring work to the authorities to do that, because families, they are very close to their loved ones. They play a very critical role here to deter online radicalization.
But that's a big question, because much of our lives lived online, all the work we do, the stuff we do at school, our social interaction. So Nick, maybe I get your take on this, because our young people are living more online than maybe in the real world, and we can't keep an eye on them 24/7. We can't be knowing exactly what it is they're looking at all the time. What do you think here is the concern? How should parents respond to what Dr. Ali has just said?
In these online games, they're very diverse, and they have different features and different ways in their design, they facilitate conversations or relationships. But at the end of the day, their aim is to be interactive and engaging. And actually, a lot of these conversations are very much within small groups, and it's very easy to be anonymous. So it's really, really tough. I'm a parent myself, and it's really tough to say that, I need to be totally aware of how my kids are having conversations or who they're meeting in every game. It is a really, really tough responsibility for parents, right? It doesn't really help that for the longest time, as the youth, they spend time in the games, right? Which is meant to be very, very engaging. They end up spending more time than they hope to spend. And then it ends up like maybe affecting their grades. Or sometimes it's just a great place for them to hide away, get away from the mainstream. And then they come online, they meet other people who may be kind of like feeling the same about life as them, right? They're feeling, they don't feel that society is treating them right, and that they're meeting each other. They are like almost like commiserating,
right?
And they're building relationships, they're bonding.
Does this online space then become more welcoming to them? Do they feel more included there? Do they find more of a community there?
It could be a more fertile ground. As they come together, they feel that they are meeting like-minded fellow youths who feel the same way as they do, and maybe creates a more fertile ground for recruitment or radicalization.
Because the 15-year-old actually told investigators that he stumbled on podcasts by preacher Ismail, and within months he was deeply radicalized. We also know that there are a lot of nasheeds or ISIS songs, in a sense, that are online on YouTube. They're very emotive, just like many religious songs out there. So are these kids also not able to discern between what they should be looking at or what they should not be looking at? You don't know, right? Everything looks okay to you, right?
Many of these young people, when they are on the verge of radicalization, they were looking for some kind of religious identity. In many cases, they want to learn about Islam, but the problem is they do not want to go to the mosque, even learn Islam from accredited religious teachers, because to them this is kind of waste time. Everything that the religious teachers taught in class, they can get it better online, right? So this is where the danger lies when, religious knowledge, for example, like those cases, you heard these young people, young boys listening to Mufti Meng and foreign preachers like Zakir Naik and others, because their understanding and teaching of Islam does not suit the context of Singapore.
Okay.
This reality is not known by many young Muslims here.
And are these young ones a bit naive also? So they hear this preacher, he's so charismatic, he makes it so engaging, you're like, wow, that sounds so good, right?
Exactly.
So they get caught up in it. Yeah, Omer.
I just want to put in some other perspectives here at this point. Firstly, in the online space, there are all kinds of extremism. And we just mentioned there's the far right. There's even a lot of misogynist ideas out there. You've heard about the incel subculture. There's this new stuff going around called gore posting and schizo posting and so on and so forth. There are a lot of harmful ideologies out there, political, religious, or otherwise. There's no filter on this.
Yeah.
When someone who is young and not able to discern is going online, you basically have a real buffet spread of stuff that you can explore. There are no limits to what they can explore. But one of the main things we need to understand is this whole idea of community, finding your identity. But we've got to remember another thing, this thing about alternate families. When they lose touch with the real world, when they can't really connect with basically people in the real world, with their own families and our communities in the real world, they find an alternate family, an alternate group of people who see them, understand their world. It's kind of like the movie Avatar. It says, I see you.
But Nicholas, most parents are a bit concerned about the games because we've heard of Roblox, and now there's this platform Discord, which essentially is a chat room for young people, right? And my son uses it too to chat with friends. So how have these platforms become such a powerful tool for radicalization?
First of all, as Dr. Omer has mentioned, right, there's all sorts of extremism. It may not just be religious. For a lot of these young people, they go online they're digital natives, right? So they tend to have a stronger affinity towards technology, like you mentioned, Discord. Sometimes when I talk to these young people, if I'm not on Discord, I'm not cool, right? I should be talking to them on not on Discord. At the same time, if you think about it, we are encouraging them towards technology, to embrace technology, and then at the same time they're learning about like coding, programming, and some of them they come together and they feel some of the things that are happening in the wider society may not resonate with them, and they feel a sense of resentment, and they're bonding together. It's not just like say about religious extremism, right? You could be grooming hackers, they could be gearing towards ideologies like Anonymous. To your point about the parents' concern, that platforms like Discord, games like Minecraft and Roblox, right, kind of like promotes this push for them to embrace this technology, to learn more about how to use technology, right? And without proper guidance, it's tough.
But Nicholas, I mean, to be fair, technology has a lot of good. They do learn a lot from a lot of these platforms. But I pick up on two words you mentioned, fester and breeding ground. So it almost is like a seed, you build it, and then you start letting it grow a little bit. But it's just that it happens online and unsupervised, because one of the teens mentioned how he had joined multiple ISIS-themed servers that basically replicated conflict in the real world. And he was playing a game as if he was an ISIS member shooting other people, So it was a simulation that we use now to train some of our real soldiers. This sounds really scary. Are we equipped to deal with these methods that these organizations are using?
Steve, I just want to add what research on this basically shows at the moment. You see, there are many types of gamers out there. We've got to understand they're not all the same. The category that you are talking about, for example, ISIS, far-right groups, a lot of them have produced their own first-person shooter game and stuff out there that basically pulls people who are already radicalized. I repeat, they're already radicalized into this ecosystem. So it's just an echo chamber of like-minded people who are just playing it out within that beautiful fantasy that they've already created. But there is another archetype. Now, this is basically an open ground in which they are looking out for potential recruits. And the thing is that whether it's neo-Nazi symbolism, jihadi symbolism, some of them subtly sort of bring that into the communication that happens within these online gaming platforms. What I'm trying to say, and this is an important point, we don't know enough about digital natives and their subculture, which is changing rapidly. Hate speech and stuff is normalized. I was just speaking to a gamer, and they were saying that, for example, like FIFA, they're playing a game and one of the members does badly in that game. And suddenly everybody sort of gangs up and they start hating this person. And very, very fast, that speech becomes hate speech. It's the norm. There are even groups like Gamergate that are trying to keep women out of it. And they are very misogynist and so on and so forth. You see all that happening. It's an environment in which this can propagate. But having said that, there's a lot of good that's happening in terms of cultivating things like good sportsmanship in esports and so on and so forth. Most people can find their way. But the thing is that you have a wide open space in which all kinds of people come in, those who are well adjusted and those who are not.
And if it's not properly regulated, then it allows these young people to be influenced by others who may be wanting to really lead them astray.
Related to this, Steve, is that many of us, including our young people, they are increasingly exposed to overseas developments, including global conflicts. And that impacts sense of justice and spark outrage. As a result of youth being the most ill-equipped section of our community to manage their emotions rationally, these young people are stumbling into inappropriate responses.
Right.
In terms of channeling their anger, their resentment, and even their feeling of unhappiness. So this is where I think we need to come. It's not always about religion, but they also have this sense of unhappiness, grievances that we also need to look at.
If you think about it also, 15, 16-year-old, you're kind of just growing up, you're still figuring life out, figuring out what to do, what not to do, so you're still learning a lot on your own. And then suddenly you have this whole buffet spread of things to choose from and everything looks so exciting, so it is hard for them too. How do we save our youth? Because we want to get them before they get into this state, right?
I would like to give another perspective to this. We always mention that youth radicalization is the problem of the young people, but it's actually a reflection of the problems of our own society. We have to also understand that how the entire gaming and social media platform works. As we know that there are incentives for the creators of this gaming and social media platform to find ways to keep their users online. So for this purpose, it makes sense for the software designers to look into the things that kind of will keep the users looking at their screen.
Okay.
So for example, a young boy is watching a factual video on 9/11, and then the platform will then recommend more videos, the algorithm selecting each one more extreme and outrageous.
Yeah.
Right?
The algorithms will
So
do that.
exactly. So there are several factors that we need to look into. It's not one dimension only to this problem.
Are you looking for ways to make your money work harder for you? Or need tips on saving, investing, and making financial decisions? Join me, Andrea Heng, on Money Talks, CNA's top personal finance podcast. From investment basics to the FIRE movement and legacy planning, Money Talks looks at financial trends and stories that matter to you. Check out our complete playlist on the CNA app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us or subscribe for new episodes every Tuesday.
So it sounds like in a lot of these platforms and these games, there's a lack of content moderation. Nicholas, are these platforms actually less regulated? Should there be more sort of moderation?
We can all agree that because game companies, they create these games, and these games become a platform for these conversations and relationships and potential perfect grounds for radicalization, that the game publishers should do more. But the reality is that they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Thousands of games are being launched every month. They all vary in how they design, in terms of the gameplay, and obviously some of them have more resources than the others. To your point about regulation, right now, there's little to no incentive for them to do any form of moderation. They are incentivized by having more people play the game, more people coming to enjoy it. So for those who are maybe more matured in how they think about it, they realize that if these conversations are unhealthy, it would affect the experience of the game, and they would put some resources to moderate the experience. But otherwise, there might be a need for regulation or a stick.
But at the same time, you're saying there's really no incentive from them because it limits the number of people they have. It means a kid may come in and say, oh, no fun, everything is censored. There is some government regulation. Certain content and sites are blocked out, but it will never be foolproof. So are we looking at more stricter policing overall? Omer, what do you think?
There are many global associations that actually are looking into this at the moment. And even within the major gaming platforms. For example, if you look at the Global Internet Forum for Countering Terrorism, Discord is already a member of GIFCT. But the thing is that there are so many new games being uploaded so often. There are many smaller players out there. How are you going to regulate all of them? Even if they want to be regulated and to prevent bad actors using their platforms, they may not have the capacity to regulate their smaller platforms. So this is the big challenge that we are facing. And sometimes one of the main things that we need to do is educate the whole community per se. You need good ambassadors within gamers. That is the only way we can go about this. Gamers policing gamers. It's not just law enforcement. Can you imagine that? A community of gamers who are out there to ensure that they can keep the good things about their sport alive.
So okay, I hear what you're saying. So in a way, we're saying regulation, policing can only do so much, but we must look at how we can look out for each other. And I guess, as you mentioned, within the gaming community, I play this game called Ultimate Frisbee, where we are self-ruled in the sense that we self-referee the game. Every player is a referee in that sense. And there's a certain integrity that comes from that, Can this exist online in such a platform? Do you think the kids, I mean, they're quite young as well. Are they mature enough to take on such a role?
I'm going to need to depend on Nicholas on this one because you have all kinds of youth profiles coming in. Nicholas, what do you think based on the youth that you've seen in the gaming industry?
I definitely agree in the direction that Dr. Omer has suggested and recommended, right? You should take. The part that made me pause, just kind of remembering that some of these games, for example, like Minecraft, the profile of the gamers are like really, really young. And some of them don't even know how to brush their teeth before they sleep, right?
Okay.
Thinking about my own kids, right? Just and to kind of to educate them to say that they have to self-regulate in a sense. Yeah, it depends. I think it will work better for some games or some platforms more than others.
For every new game that exists, perhaps if there was a regulation to say that you must have a moderator who is at least 15 years old, who has taken a certificate in I don't know. I mean, it sounds pretty far-fetched, but basically we're teaching the kids how to be more responsible with what they're doing online.
It's not so far-fetched. It's just that it exists in countries like China and Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
More in that sense, the kind of tougher regulation. In China, all the games have to have a publishing license, and then you cannot play more than 2 hours. When you speak to regulators in other jurisdictions, say, can you do the same? They're like, oh, but there are thousands of games being launched every week. And as a regulator, in order to regulate the game, you actually have to play all the games, and that takes a lot of resources. That's the challenge, right?
We have to stop chasing the platforms, because today it's Roblox, tomorrow it's something else, and tomorrow we'll start talking about the metaverse, and then we'll talk about something else again. So it's a more holistic approach that we need to take at this point with regards to the communities, youth, their relationship with their families. That's going to be the best defense we're going to have.
It's a whole of society approach, what Omar mentioned. My take on this, Steve, is that regulation is a monumental task. What we need to do right now is to prioritize programs that educate internet users to deal with internet content. Family members, they need to be informed about the indicators and telltale signs of radicalization. The parents in these 3 cases, they did not know that their children are on the verge of radicalization and have been radicalized.
Yeah.
Unless they're aware about the indicators, telltale signs, then they can intervene at the early stage.
So that brings us to that point, how do we look out for the signs? What are the red flags that we need to be aware of? Because in this case, I think one of the kids, some of his friends thought he was just a bit weird, so they kind of just left him alone. And to be fair, in every school, there will always be a few kids who seem a bit weird, but they don't end up becoming radicalized. So how do you differentiate?
So some of the important warning signs of radicalization that family members should look out. For example, including number 1, justifying the use of violence to defend a cause, and also expressing intent to take part in acts of violence locally or overseas. The other telltale signs include individuals idolizing terrorist personalities, expressing support for groups like ISIS, frequenting radical websites. Parents can also detect the change of behavior in their child's character. So all this, I don't think parents, they know that they should be aware, not only monitoring the online activities of their children, but to be informed on these indicators and signs of radicalization.
But the signs also are not such distinct signs. And, as kids grow up, as teenagers, there will be good days, bad days. And for the parents, even if they spot something, then what? Who should they turn to?
If they discover or they found out that their loved ones are on the verge of radicalization and in the early stage, I think they need to intervene by first giving advice, advising them and stop them. If they succeed to do this, I think that's fine. But the issue, if they are not able to do this and these things continue, the parents need to get some help.
Okay.
And this could be, from religious leaders and teachers, or even if things seems to get worse, parents can even call the RRG.
Okay.
And we can come in to see how we can help all these individuals.
Yeah, some may be afraid because they're saying if I report, then my kid will get arrested, get detained, But I'm sure you can tell them that it's better to seek help first before reaching that stage, right?
We can understand that if they are kind of afraid to report to ISD, but they can come to community groups like the RRG and we can help them. Without reporting to ISD. Because we believe that these individuals, they are at the very early stage of radicalization and we can do something to help them overcome their issues.
I think it's so important for the community around to be aware as well. In fact, actually, it's also mainly boys, right? Nicholas, maybe you can tell me a bit more about why. Is it simply because more boys play these games?
Not necessarily. I mean, some games have as many girls as boys, but sometimes talking about identity, right? It seems that boys, when they are on these online platforms playing games, they tend to feel more powerful or a need to have that digital online identity that they are powerful, and then they tend to then associate themselves with I am so and so fighter, hero, and perhaps that's the part that there's a bit more affinity. I don't normally see ladies or girls in these games exhibiting that kind of behavior or having that kind of conversations as the boys do.
Okay. So what tips will you have out there for parents? We all know our kids are on these platforms, they're playing these games. How do I keep an eye on them? What should I be looking out for?
Steve, if I may just cite a certain example from one of the case studies that was done some time back. As a news article, if I'm not mistaken, it was the New York Times that published this story about the lonely young American in ISIS. And what they mentioned was that the recruiters They know exactly what these individuals want, and that's presence. And I think this is something that parents should take note of. But even in their recruitment, it's not just one recruiter, it's a whole group of them, so that any time of the day or night, someone is there for them. And sometimes one of the things that they mention is when you get to know this person, when you're grooming them, don't talk about religion first. Become a friend. Be a friend. Be there for them. One of the things that we need to notice is when youth are starting to isolate and they are basically living in that alternate reality and they are basically getting cut off from parents. I'm not going to offer parenting advice, but one of the things that we may need to do is that be present.
Right.
In some ways, win that trust. If you can do that in those small incremental ways, that's going to open doors for them to perhaps open up when they need to.
That is exactly the strategy for our rehabilitation process. That we have to make friends with our clients first, not to talk about religion and identify what are the issues that needs to be dealt with. After building this rapport and cordial relationship with our clients, and then we try to attempt to address the real concerns or issues that the detainees have.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for your thoughts on this. I mean, it really sounds like, as you mentioned, I think the key to reaching out, especially to our own kids, is, well, for one, we got to remember, stop lecturing them like parents. We need to establish a relationship where our kids feel that they can open up to us, they can tell us things, they can relate to us. Because as a young person who is still in the midst of learning about life, I mean, it's hard for them to make sense of who they are, where they're at in life, and they need someone to talk to. It's just that very often the parent doesn't come to mind, right? Because we've built that kind of relationship with them. So if not us, then maybe they need to have a close mentor, a close family friend, someone they can turn to, that they can confide in, and then I guess that will help give them an opportunity to, let off some steam if they need to, and to, get them on the right track at an early stage. Because as we all know, with technology today, it's far less straightforward, and it's so much easier to be isolated and lonely without anyone really knowing about it. Well, thank you all for joining us on this chat today. Dr. Ali, Dr. Omer, Nicholas, thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts on this. I think my takeaway from our chat today is just got to keep the conversations going, the little chats with the kids about what they're up to, what games they're playing. I try to jump in and play with my son once in a while. At least I get some sense of what he's up to. As they say, I guess you got to try and stay woke. Because if you're that friend and you hear something, at least you can act on it. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the conversation and that you've learned something from our discussion today. The team behind Heart of the Matter is Jacqueline Chan, Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, Saya Win, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Stephen Chia. I'll see you next week.